Thank you, Phil, so much. I do want to highlight, I mean, Phil has done a lot of work in the building in the last year, but one thing he did that to me is miraculous and will change my life forever is that he was able to separate the sconces in this room from the overhead lights. Amazing. So we have a little more options in terms of mood lighting, and I am truly grateful for that. I'm going to share a few words. I have spent most of the last week sitting by the bedside of my father, whose life is slowly ebbing. Some lives go out in an instant, like a flash of lightning. Others go out like the tide, gradually, at first imperceptibly. Is it possible to detect the moment when the tide's turn occurs? Until eventually the waterline has obviously receded, exposing the treasures of low tide, the shells, the smooth stones, and the sand-burnished glass. The treasures of these days have been manifold. The sweet conversations with the man whose genes I carry and have passed along. The joy of his reaching a goal. He turned 92 last Friday, and we celebrated with cannoli. It was a favorite food from his Manhattan childhood in a neighborhood of Jewish delis and Italian bakeries. What makes a life a life? To measure my father's life in geographical terms, he didn't get very far. Just 21 East Side blocks from the 30th Street apartment of his childhood down to 9th Street, to the dream come true home that he and my mother have shared for the past 35 years. But of course, there are other ways to measure a life. In the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, our tradition asks that we engage in a process called Cheshbon HaNefesh, an accounting of the soul. We reflect back on the past year with the intention of examining our relationships and our shortcomings and honestly evaluating how we may have strayed from our best intentions. To take measure. And today on Yom Kippur, we show up humbly to join with others to lament our failings and consider how we might adjust course, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, resolving to do better next year. I asked my father, the accountant, if he's leaving this life with balanced books. He smiled and said, I hope so. The best advice I ever received from my father was when he and my mother were dropping me off for my first semester at college. He told me to get involved, to show up, to say, Hineni, here I am, and step into whatever college, and therefore life, has to offer. My father has always been one to step up, to take responsibility, and to face life's challenges head on, with clear eyes, with care and respect for others. There are core values expressed through the words of Moshe and the Torah that I understood intrinsically because they describe my father's values. He taught by example, by keeping honest weights and measures, and not favoring the rich over the poor, nor the poor over the rich, or even his family over a stranger. The Haftorah reading for Yom Kippur afternoon is the book of Jonah. It's an interesting choice. Unlike Abraham, who consistently answers God's call, Jonah, when called by God to a mission to save a city, heads in the opposite direction. Instead of Hineni, he says, I'm out of here. And he gets on a ship to somewhere, anywhere else. It isn't until a huge storm sets in that he understands that his very presence endangers the entire crew. The sailors throw him overboard, and immediately the roiling waters become calm. When Jonah is then swallowed by a big fish, he finds himself alone in the cavern of its belly, and he has some quiet, solitary time to reflect. He engages in cheshbon hanefesh, self-accounting, does teshuvah, and repents for his missing the mark. Why was the story chosen for our holiest day of the year? What does it say to us about human nature? It is all too natural to see trouble and be tempted to go the other way. How many of you are fantasizing a move to Portugal to escape the insanity and growing dangers perpetrated by the Make America Great Again gang as they destroy American democracy and social institutions to remake them in their own image? Or what the Trump-Netanyahu axis has already done to Gaza, leveling a civilization in order to remake that strip of land in the image of Mar-a-Lago. As they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Or when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. It's a natural impulse. It's easy to identify with Jonah. But our tradition calls us to reconsider, to resist the impulse to turn away. And if at first we have turned away, to take a pause. Sometimes when we don't do this voluntarily, the universe imposes this pause forcefully. To do some self-accounting and turn, return, shift direction back to the place of what Torah calls the covenant, the place of moral responsibility. It is also notable that the people that Jonah is being sent to save are not Jews. He's called by God to save the Babylonian residents of Nineveh. The message: we as Jews are not best served by living in isolation. We must not insulate ourselves with the cloak of Jewish exceptionalism. We must not turn away from the suffering of people not of our tribe. No, we are called to participate in the larger world, to answer the call of suffering from wherever it comes, and to follow it wherever it leads us. Out in our lobby, to the right of the door as you go out, hangs a ceramic artwork with the famous words of German theologian Martin Niemöller, who began as a Nazi sympathizer but did teshuvah during the years of his imprisonment at Dachau, and came to deeply regret not having done enough to help the victims of the Nazis. And this is what he wrote. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The placement of this quote is deliberate. When you leave the sanctuary, go out into the world and answer the call to address suffering wherever you find it. Don't neglect the needs of your family or tribe, though, in order to do this work. But don't limit your care only to those you identify with. Like we discussed last week in connection with the Rosh Hashanah Torah portion, God hears the cry of Hagar, who has been cast out into the wilderness, whose name, Hagar, means the stranger, the one who is not us. Torah in the creation story at the beginning of Genesis describes humans as having been created, but Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And thus we understand that this applies to all humans, Jews and Babylonians alike. Moshe Cordovero, a 16th century Sfad Kabbalist, begins his small but mighty treatise, Tomer Devorah, the palm tree of Deborah, like this. It is proper for a human to emulate the Creator, for then they will attain the secret of the supernal form in both image, tselem, and likeness, demut. Because the chief supernal image and likeness is in deeds, a human resemblance merely in bodily appearance and not in deeds debases that form. Consequently, it is proper for one to imitate the acts of the supernal crown, which are the 13 highest attributes of mercy hinted at in these verses. Who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity and pardoning transgression, not staying angry forever toward the remnant of your own people, because you love graciousness. God will take us back in love, quashing our iniquities. You will hurl all our sins into the sea, hurl all our sins into the depths of the sea, showing faithfulness to Yaakov, kindness to Abraham, which was promised to our ancestors from the days of old. These verses from Micah are a paraphrase of the 13 attributes recited by Moshe of the Torah as he pleads with God to forgive the people for the transgression of worshiping a golden calf during the 40 days and 40 nights of his sojourn at the top of Mount Sinai. Moshe appeals to God's qualities, the core quality being chesed, unconditional love. If idolatry is at the top of the ways that humans can transgress, and this is evident from the number of times this prohibition is raised throughout the Torah, expecting forgiveness for this transgression is not assured. And so Moshe reminds God of God's attributes, particularly God's love for humanity, and the lives of the people are spared, at least by God. And so, as Cordovero instructs and the Musar movement from 19th century Lithuania amplifies, we can be guided in our attempt for right ethical action by studying these 13 attributes of God and using these qualities to help shape our intentions and actions. What would this world be like if we led with chesed, with unconditional love toward all creatures? Let this be a goal for the new year. And when we've missed the mark, let's be willing to acknowledge that, to know that we will fail over and over again, but acknowledge that failure and begin again with better understanding. There is no greater gift that we can give to one another than the gift of our time. A little bit of focused attention and empathic listening can go a long way toward relieving the stress and loneliness of another person. To listen generously without judgment, as we would wish that we might be heard. Isn't this ultimately the golden rule? To offer to others what we might want offered to ourselves. These last days with my father have been invaluable, and there's nowhere else I would rather be than his bedside, while sharing meals and caregiving responsibilities with my mother and my brother. There's no more normal, my mother said at dinner on Tuesday night. Was she referring to her life with her partner of 71 years? Or the imminent government shutdown, another insult to American citizenry that has witnessed the breaking apart of civil institutions at the whim of a narcissist madman who is recreating this country for his own benefit with the seeming permission of too many congressional leaders and too much of the electorate. The other day, during a quiet moment, in between visits from family and friends, I asked my father, what comes next? I don't know, he said, and smiled his wry smile. I told him that in last week's Torah portion, Moses tells the people, I am now 120 years old, and I can no longer come and go. Do you want to live to 120, Dad? He rolled his eyes and laughed and shook his head. No. At 92, he already cannot come and go and is dependent on us to move him from the bed to a wheelchair and to feed him his soup. The fatigue is overwhelming, but he still followed the baseball season this summer and asked about the score of Tuesday night's wild card playoff game, disappointed to hear that Boston had beat the Yankees 3-1. I am certainly not the first person to lose a parent, but you who have crossed this threshold before me know that it is an event that changes everything. And so much is changing everywhere. My prayer for all of us is that we find relief in this new year, that these holy days together have brought you some comfort, as we have also visited the depths of our grief and despair, for so much has been lost. but that this community continues to provide a wellspring for you of growth and support. Thank you so much. We will now make a transition to the Yizkor service. We have some booklets that will be distributed. And Rabbi Jonathan is going to be our leader for this part of the service.